The miracles of Jesus. Jesus changes water into wine. On the third day there was a wedding. It took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why are you telling me about this?" Jesus replied, "The time for me to show who I really am isn't here yet." His mother said to the servants, "Do what he tells you." 6 stone water jars stood nearby. The Jews used water from that kind of jar for special washings. They did that to make themselves pure and clean. Each jar could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the top. Then he told them, "Now dip some out. Take it to the person in charge of the dinner." They did what he said. The person in charge tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from. But the servants who had brought the water knew. Then the person in charge called the groom to one side. He said to him, "Everyone brings out the best wine first. They bring out the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best until now." What Jesus did here in Cana in Galilee was the first of his signs. Jesus showed his glory by doing this sign. And his disciples believed in him. Jesus forgives and heals a man who could not walk. A few days later, Jesus entered Capernaum again. The people heard that he had come home. So many people gathered that there was no room left. There was not even room outside the door. And Jesus preached the word to them. 4 of those who came were carrying a man who could not walk. But they could not get him close to Jesus because of the crowd. So they made a hole by digging through the roof above Jesus. Then they lowered the man through it on a mat. Jesus saw their faith. So he said to the man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Some teachers of the law were sitting there. They were thinking, "Why is this fellow talking like that? He's saying a very evil thing. Only God can forgive sins." Right away Jesus knew what they were thinking. So he said to them, "Why are you thinking these things? Is it easier to say to this man, 'Your sins are forgiven'? Or to say, 'Get up, take your mat and walk'? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." So Jesus spoke to the man who could not walk. "I tell you," he said, "get up. Take your mat and go home." The man got up and took his mat. Then he walked away while everyone watched. All the people were amazed. They praised God and said, "We have never seen anything like this." Jesus calms the storm. Jesus got into a boat. His disciples followed him. Suddenly a terrible storm came up on the lake. The waves crashed over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him up. They said, "Lord, save us. We're going to drown." He replied, "Your faith is so small. Why are you so afraid?" Then Jesus got up and ordered the winds and the waves to stop. It became completely calm. The disciples were amazed. They asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." Two blind men received their sight. Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho. A large crowd followed him. Two blind men were sitting by the side of the road. They heard that Jesus was going by. So they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd commanded them to stop. They told them to be quiet. But the two men shouted even louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called out to them. "What do you want me to do for you?" He asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want to be able to see." Jesus felt deep concern for them. He touched their eyes. Right away they could see. And they followed him. Jesus raises a widow's son from the dead. Some time later, Jesus went to a town called Nain. His disciples and a large crowd went along with him. He approached the town gate. Just then, a dead person was being carried out. He was the only son of his mother. She was a widow. A large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, he felt sorry for her. So he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the coffin. Those carrying it stood still. Jesus said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk. Then Jesus gave him back to his mother. The people were all filled with wonder and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. God has come to help his people. This news about Jesus spread all through Judea and the whole country. Jesus feeds the 5,000. Some time after this, Jesus crossed over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. It is also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd of people followed him. They had seen the signs he had done by healing sick people. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside. There he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. Jesus looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him. So he said to Philip, "Where can we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test Philip. He already knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "Suppose we were able to buy enough bread for each person to have just a bite. That would take more than half a year's pay." Another of his disciples spoke up. It was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He said, "Here is a boy with 5 small loaves of barley bread. He also has 2 small fish. But how far will that go in such a large crowd?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Then Jesus took the loaves and gave thanks. He handed out the bread to those who were seated. He gave them as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. When all of them had enough to eat, Jesus spoke to his disciples. "Gather the leftover pieces," he said. "Don't waste anything." So they gathered what was left over from the 5 barley loaves. They filled 12 baskets with the pieces left by those who had eaten. The people saw the sign that Jesus did. Then they began to say, "This must be the prophet who is supposed to come into the world." But Jesus knew that they planned to come and force him to be their king. So he went away again to a mountain by himself.